Good morning, Rev Walter here. Today is Monday and it's the 30th of September. And as you know, we always come through with these trainings on a regular basis every single day, Monday to Friday from 7:30 to roughly 8:10. So between 30 and 40 minutes where we give you this mentorship free of charge. So all you got to do is just invite somebody and tell somebody to tell somebody. And so when you come on, like the two of you that are watching right now, the 3, 4 that I'm seeing, 5, okay, number is growing. What you want to do is you want to alert somebody, you want to tag somebody, you want to tell them, hey, it's on, watch this. And I'm sure you will be doing us a great favor. That's the only thing we ask of you. So don't be selfish, don't keep knowledge to yourself, but share it with everybody. And we come every single day with these programs. On Monday, you have myself, Rev Walter, here with Unleashing Your Destiny. And then on Tuesdays, you have Dr. Sunshine Sylvia, who right now happens to be in Malaysia. So on Tuesday, we will have somebody standing in on her behalf. And then on Wednesdays, we have open market. So on Wednesday, just an open market and people can take advantage, join in and be part of what's going on. And then on Thursdays, and of course, there are those who may want to also take advantage and, you know, come in commercially. We have an open platform for that. So you can come through and then be part of it. Then on Thursdays, we have the indomitable Dr. Nelly Kangwa, who comes through with Prosperity for Your Soul. And then on Fridays, we have Dr. Jacqueline Mulundika, who normally comes with healthy tips. And we have had Dr. John Mubanga standing in on her behalf for the last couple of weeks. But Doc is back in full swing, so we should be seeing her very soon, also making part of presentations for this. So remember to share this. I want to see you tag somebody in the comments right now. Just let us know what's happening. Place an emoji, just let us know it's happening. Then tag somebody. Make sure you tag somebody and share this on your socials. So today we pick it up. I am doing a whole series on the transformation of Africa, and we're still dealing with the first of the 7 keys, the major keys to transforming. The first one is to take responsibility, and I'm really going through with this responsibility message because it's such a big one to our transformative process. Now I pick up on the second African statesman. So last time I had done another statesman and his betrayal, and that was Sankara. And so today I want to pick up on another statesman and who has come to be viewed as a martyr of colonialism and Panafricanism by most people on the continent. He was the first democratically elected premier of the Democratic Republic of Congo under the presidency of its first president of that republic at the time, Joseph Kasa-Vubu. Now, as you may be aware, Congo was colonized by Belgium, which ran its affairs after taking over it from the monarch, King Leopold II, who was behind the most horrible atrocities that characterized his control when it was known as the Congo Free State. Now, after World War II, it became increasingly obvious that there was a strong independence movement and revolution brewing in many African countries. And this meant that there was need to ensure a smooth handover of affairs to the Congolese people if Belgian interests were to remain secured. Okay, which interest? The one secured under Leopold, right? Now, considering how large Congo is as well as its multi-ethnic and cultural background, uniting the Congo under one national banner was a gargantuan task. It was very difficult, okay? And many of its early pre-independence leaders were more popular in their provinces and ethnic centers, call them states, if you will, although they don't use that term because Congo is not a federal state like Nigeria, for instance. Now, only Patrice Emery Lumumba and his party, the MNC, Mouvement National Congolais, had broad multi-ethnic and multi-regional representation. However, even with that unity, that unity was fragile and required a lot of machinations and negotiations to form stronger bonds, okay? And this was a challenge even for the colonial overseers, right? As they worked hard to get this unity government to work through Lumumba. Now, when Lumumba became prime minister, he had 2 main goals, okay? To ensure that independence would bring a legitimately improved quality of life for the Congolese people. And he was going to do this through a comprehensive Africanization policy. Very controversial Africanization. In Zambia, we called it Zambianization. So many of these countries in Africa and our early transformative leaders of the continent were big on Africanization. Now, know that the colonialists opposed this because it dealt with interests, and Belgium was no exception. Why? Too many job losses and the return of their citizens to that country, Belgium, which they could not afford to reabsorb. So over the 40, 50 years that Belgium had been ruling the Congo, a lot of Belgian citizens had relocated to Belgium, to the Congo, and settled there as settlers. We know that because even in Zambia, we have Zambians of non-African origin, of non-indigenous origin. We have a lot of them, many of them whites. And so when you do your background check, you find they predominantly from two groups. They were the European the European whites, what you call settlers, who came during the 20th century itself. And then there are those who came as ancestors. So that's usually the Boers from South Africa, and they really were here from a long time ago. Jean van Riebeck and their whole group from back in the 1500s went and settled in the Cape, and that's the other group. So these whites spread all across Africa. But with Belgium, it was very unique because they were coming directly from Belgium. Because remember, Belgium was first the Belgian Congo, and it was the Congo Free State under King Leopold. So they were a whole different thing. So Belgium wasn't too comfortable with the idea of reabsorbing them back into their country because they had social care over those. And so Belgium would do everything in its power to ensure their citizens remained in the Congo. All right. And also, so back to what's his name, Lumumba. So he had to improve the quality of life for these guys with Africanization, because he felt if we have Africans owning their own companies, they would be more caring about the interests of Africans. Obvious. All right. And then also the other challenge that Lumumba had was to unify. Okay. So to unify the country as a centralized state by eliminating tribalism and regionalism. He was worried that opposition to his government would appear rapidly and had to be managed quickly and decisively. So he got working on this national unity. Okay, so his goal as a young 35-year-old firebrand of a politician, his goal was to create national unity, and that was to happen through various parliamentary parties to forge it, and had been inspired by what the Ghanaian president then, Kwame Nkrumah, had put together in his own country and through his Pan-African agenda. As you recall, Kwame Nkrumah would be called or known as the father of modern Pan-Africanism. So he was big on this, right? And so unfortunately, in spite of these great ideals, Lumumba had several things going against him, and combined with what I can only attribute as a certain level of naivety became his undoing. So Lumumba was very naive. And I'm going to go into that and explain a little bit what I mean by that. Now, firstly, Lumumba made a very strong enemy of the former colonial master of Belgium. All right? As already mentioned, the rapid Africanization program placed Belgium in an awkward position. But this was also worsened by his impromptu speech at the independence ceremony, where he is quoted as saying, now picture this, I'm going to read this just now. Picture this. When the Belgian king at the time, I think I forgot his name, when he went to hand over these events where countries were handed over and given independence were very ceremonial. But the truth of the matter is that behind the scenes, there were serious deals that would be signed. I mean, Zambia is no exception. We had some serious deals that had to be made. And many of you may have heard of a place called Lancaster House. This is the place where a lot of issues governing colonial matters were decided and planned. India is no exception. Many African countries under the British are no exception. Zambia is no exception. So we would all be kind of holed over there by the colonial office, and then they would go and sign deals. So we know Zambia here. I mean, I don't want to digress, but we know Zambia here. We signed some deals. Kaunda, Kapwepwe, and Nkumbula, where the three that were taken over to Britain And then there in Britain, they signed certain deals. What's his name? Mugabe, when he was working out for Zimbabwe, they signed certain deals. So this is the background behind the colonial office. And so when Congo was becoming independent on the 30th of June, somebody thought it wise not to include Lumumba on the list of guests that would give a speech. But Lumumba, being the firebrand he is, he bypassed protocol. When, this is on Independence Day. There's King Leopold II, whatever his name was. He was sitting there, and you had all these officials. You had Kasa-Vubu, you had all the different Shombe, whoever, and Congo is being given its independence. And Leopold gets up and does his speech, and everybody claps. And of course, it's the usual rhetorical, gobbledygook, nothing really, like just the usual things everybody says in diplomatic circles. And then up goes Lumumba. He wasn't on the list. He goes up there, and then listen to what Lumumba said. These are his words. He said, for this independence of the, so remember, he goes up there and like, hey, you're not supposed to be, and he just gets up there and puts himself on the program and gets the microphone and speaks. And everybody's sitting there listening. And of course, there's someone like, oh my God, I know this guy. I really hope he's not going to say what he's going to say. And then here he comes. This is what he says. So I'm in his speech. These are some of his words. He said, for this independence of the Congo, although being proclaimed today by agreement with Belgium, an amicable country with which we are on equal terms, no Congolese worthy of his name will ever be able to forget that it was by fighting that it has been won. A day-to-day fight, an ardent and idealistic fight, a fight in which we are spared neither privation nor suffering, and for which we gave our strength and our blood. We are proud of this struggle of tears, of fire, and of blood to the depth of our being, for it was a noble and just struggle and indispensable to put an end to the humiliating slavery which was imposed upon us by force. Of course, I'm translating from French, and you could see, people literally sinking in their chairs, like, it was so undiplomatically, it was so uncouth, it was so undiplomatic. Yes, he said the truth, but not the right forum. Not the right forum. So reports state that many European journalists were stunned by the harshness of Lumumba's speech. The Western media condemned him immediately. Time magazine branded his speech as a venomous attack. In the West, many feared that the speech was a call to arms that would revive Belgian-Congolese hostilities, which were already at an all-time high, actually, and plunge the former Belgian colony into chaos, which unfortunately did happen after his death. In short, the things they feared happened. All right. The Belgians living in the Congo found themselves in the way of a mutiny in the force publique. Remember, the army that was running and controlling the Congo then was called the force publique. So, of a mutiny in the force publique, in which many became victims of the subsequent rioting and anarchy that was taking place across many parts of the Congo. And since they were in mortal danger, the Belgian government saw it fit to send in their armies in a bid to protect their citizens. But that soon became different because it was seen as a direct affront on the sovereignty of the Congo. And Lumumba sought the help from the USA and UN to help with this, but that proved futile. Here's what happened. As Lumumba was giving his speech, do you know that the King of Belgium stood up and walked out midstream? He was that offended. Of course, look, I'm not going to even praise these guys, but let's stick with the narrative of why I'm saying what I'm saying. So the King of Belgium walked out. There was a terrible diplomatic scenario. And notice at the beginning of my presentation, I told you that Lumumba was naive. So what Lumumba didn't count on is the fact that diplomacy is the key to managing international affairs. And that's one thing he lacked. So by saying what he said, You must remember that the Belgians had a lot of interest in this continent and, of course, in the Congo. And you must also remember that at that time, racism was at its all-time high. America was already still running with Jim Crow. The British did consider themselves superior to Africans. That's a fact. Right across in Kenya, you had the issues going on with the Mau Mau. So let's not forget that this was a fostering, cauldron of serious issues. And so for Lumumba to stand up and make that statement, right as he was, he certainly did not read the mood right. Why do I say so? Because later on, the same Lumumba who basically spat in the face of these colonialists went to look for help from them. See that? And then further, Lumumba had, like I say, he was quite naive. So first of all, he did that, right? He spat in the face of the Belgians and called them their real name, which I'm not refusing. But that's why there's wisdom. That's why there is, the grace of words is a very powerful gift. And you need to know how to deal with situations as they occur. Because remember, there's a saying in Bemba, which I can't ever say correctly because I don't speak good Bemba, but it basically implies that when you see a blind man fight, having in tota, like, being adamant and arguing vehemently and looking like he's ready to fight, just know he's standing on a stone. In other words, he has a weapon nearby that he's going to use to fight. So in other words, he's gauged his strength. He knows where he is standing. He knows he has the power and ability, and he can take on the enemy. But when you know that you do not have the ability to take on the enemy, you do not engage in a fight. This is the reason why diplomacy exists at international level. And if you notice, for instance, right now, there's been a huge attempt by let me not talk about Israel because it's too provocative. Let's talk about Ukraine. There's been a huge song around the Ukraine telling them that since they are NATO members and they've got nuclear weapons, they should launch them, not even nuclear, just missiles, they should launch them into Russia. Do you know why Ukraine is not launching? Because Ukraine is looking to Big Brother America. And America knows, because it's been warned by Russia, that the day the Ukrainians throw any bombs on our land, we know who's the enemy, not Ukraine. Ukraine is just a pawn. We're coming for you, America. And whatever repercussions and consequences of your bombs will be on you. So you can imagine, and Russia has the clout. Russia has the military might to take on the US. The US is bigger, definitely. Missile by missile, army by army, but still, Russia is no walkover, and America knows it. They could turn the two countries into complete, they can take them back into the Stone Ages if those two decided to take each other on. So each one knows and weighs the other's power and treads with a lot of care. That's why there's a Russian embassy in America, and that's why there's an American embassy in Russia. So they deal with all the tumultuous stuff that shows up. Lumumba, unfortunately, was not wise. He didn't understand this bit about international issues. He went in there with a lot of naivety and spoke with a lot of pomp and with a lot of fierce anger, rightly so, and indignation, but without weighing the cost. And so that was his first big mistake. Second mistake, he made an enemy of the US and the UK. So already you have the Belgians as your enemies, but you also make an enemy of these two, right? So after his visit to the US to seek help proved futile. So in other words, when Lumumba went to the US, do you know that they didn't even send out the president? This is the premier coming. And the equivalent of whom he should have met should have been the president of the United States. Remember, we know this for a fact because when Mobutu took over, the times that Mobutu went to America, he was met by the presidents of America. That's how much they honored and respected Zaire and what's his name, Mobutu, because he was such a critical component to their plans in Central Africa. So the fact that they sent a high-ranking official, but not the highest, was a snub against Lumumba, and nobody met him. They never sat to talk to him. They just sent small people, and he realized that he had lost out. So he then chose to reach out to the Soviet Union. Woo, something that infuriated both the US and UK as they vied for control of Africa and its interests. And seeing this was at the highest height of the Cold War, something had to be done to bring this whole situation under control. Okay, that's what those guys say. So since Lumumba was already being considered a radical, there were already plans to have him assassinated. So when he reached out to Russia, it's like you go to the enemy of your enemy, all right? And then you want to make friends with it. But remember, you're not really at the level of any of these two. You don't have any kind of resource to fight these two. And Lumumba realized at that stage that he had booked, he had made a mistake. So he was now scampering, trying to look for help. But then he just came from insulting these people and calling them names in a rhetorical speech. This is why, again, a lot of wisdom is needed in the corridors of power, in the brokerage of power. Watch what you say. Unfortunately, that was his second mistake. The third mistake, he made a very strong enemy of Moise Tshombe and the Katanga separatists. So Katanga is where you have Lubumbashi, Likasi. It's our neighbor. It's practically Zambia. Okay. Now the Katangese, they're no longer called that today because they're part of Congo. But the Katangese were very opposed to Lumumba and his leadership, and this worsened during the negotiations that led to the formation of the first government under Kasa-Vubu. They were more than happy to find a way to rid themselves of him. So the Katangese faction hated Lumumba with a passion. We know this because of what they did to him when they got the opportunity. So they hated him. Number 4, he made enemies of the Kasai people. Okay, so an unfortunate uprising in Kasai just at the end of 1960, just towards the end of the year, led to an incident where the force publique, who should have controlled the uprising within reason, ended up committing an atrocity that led hundreds of Kasais dead at the hands of the army. This led to a palpable hatred for Lumumba. So, the historicists basically say that Lumumba signed his death warrant in 3 places. Number 1, when he insulted the King of Belgium at the Independence Day celebrations. Now, and let me just pause here. You realize that Kaunda, Mugabe, what's his name? What was the first president? Kenyatta, all these guys, they had absolutely this, even if we had to go as far as Tafawa Balewa in Nigeria, they all had ample reason to insult the colonialists, because it was a bloody war for many of these countries, especially Kenya, with the whole Mau Mau issue going on and how they slaughtered thousands and thousands and thousands of Kikuyu Mau Mau fighters. They had a reason to insult the British. They didn't. You know why? Because they learned that many times in life, diplomacy yields the best result. Let me tell you, even Mandela, there's a whole bunch of people right now that call out Mandela and claim that he's a sellout and all these things. But put yourselves in Mandela's shoes at that time. What was he supposed to do? There were only 2 options for South Africa. Go the Mandela route or go a civil war route. And the civil war route would be the Zimbabwe route, where you say, let's get back the land from the whites and all that jazz. And then who holds the economy of South Africa? We must never forget that. Who holds the economy of South Africa right now? It's the white minority, the Boers. They hold that economy. And we're talking about a massive percentage of it. Over 80% of the wealth of South Africa, in fact, I think 85% sits in the hands of your Boer people, not your indigenous Africans. These Africans you see like Ramaphosa and all these the new wealth that has come now is from affirmative action, which came after Mandela. After Mandela took over and they started the whole black empowerment movement, the Vusi Tembikwayos and what he's talking about today. That's after. So at that time, the whole entire economy is in the hands of white people, and then you go in there and you want to fight. From what basis? And I know our brother Malema has been fighting to try and get that going, but I assure you, Malema will never win the day with that kind of rhetoric. Because you know why? Too many parties are interested in making sure they keep the status quo as it is, and they can't allow that. So Lumumba signed his death warrant first with that situation. Secondly, with the situation with what I told you, with the Americans and the UK. He made enemies of those as well. Then third, with the situation of Moise Tshombe and the Katanga separatists. So these are the 3 places where the man signed his death warrant. So based on all this, the environment was ripe for an explosive confrontation. Okay? So on the 5th of September, 1960, less than even 30 days, so June 30th, less than 2 months in office, less than 2 months in office, Kasa-Vubu dismissed Lumumba from office. Lumumba declared Kasa-Vubu action unconstitutional, and the crisis between the two leaders developed. This was done on radio. Imagine you're sitting on radio. Those days it was radio. So you're sitting on radio, you hear the president get on radio and say he's fired Lumumba, the prime minister. And then you hear later the prime minister go on radio and say he's dissolved the presidents or the presidency. And so he's in charge. So now you have a crisis. Who's in charge? Okay. So events set in motion by the US, okay, and Belgium on the 14th of September. This is just a week literally after that particular situation. Removed Lumumba from office with forces loyal to Mobutu. So Mobutu was the army general. He was the army general and the joint chief of staff, whatever he was. And so he was like the guy running the whole army thing, the force public. So the Americans then engineered and then have him effectively do a coup d'etat. Okay, according to A Killing in Congo, a write-up on the US News and published on the 24th of July 2000, as well as another article by Stephen Weissman entitled Opening the Secret Files on Lumumba's Murder, published in Washington Post on the 21st of July 2001, declassified documents revealed that the CIA had plotted to assassinate Lumumba. So Lumumba was such a pain, all right? And these documents indicate that the Congolese leaders who killed Lumumba, including Mobutu Sese Seko and Joseph Kasa-Vubu, received money and weapons directly from the CIA. But it was the Belgian forces on the ground, call them the mercenaries, that was responsible for his actual execution. So here we have brothers, fellow black brothers, receiving money like Judas Iscariot to betray Lumumba. So on the 17th of January 1961, he was handed over to Katangi's authorities, including its governor, Moise Tshombe, an event that was filmed by reporters. It's one of the saddest newsreels I've ever seen. And I'm sure a number of you have seen it. Lumumba being harassed, beaten, and having his hands tied behind his back and made to eat the paper with his speech. So you remember that fiery speech that he made at the independence? These soldiers made him eat his speech. You can actually see the video, okay? It was recorded and televised all over the world on all main news platforms of the day. So this was filmed as a newsreel and immediately shared to the whole world. And the whole world watched in disbelief and horror as Lumumba was, captured, arrested, and taken to that place. He was then subsequently executed. Now, just before the execution, what happened is he was actually, let's go back, rewind a bit. Just around when they took over, when 14th of September came and Mobutu took over, Lumumba was placed on house arrest in one of the UN protected compounds. And so being stuck there, he got this idea that if he could go over to Stanleyville, I think is Kisangani, somebody can correct me, or is it Elizabethville? No, Elizabethville is what is now Lubumbashi. Okay, the names evade me, I get them wrong. But one of these places, but basically Kisangani. He felt that if he goes to Kisangani, he would then be able to mobilize much support, which he got from there, because he had a lot of support. So he said, if I can get to Kisangani, then I can relaunch a bid to take over. Obviously, somebody betrayed him within his inner camp because they tricked him into escaping. Now, as long as he was in that UN place, nobody could touch him. So he was just protected there. But obviously, Lumumba was not going to sit under house arrest in his own country for a long time. He needed to do something about the Congo. And so him and his family packed and secretly jumped in an unmarked vehicle and drove off and started the journey going to Kisangani. If you've been to the Congo, you know it's not the easiest journey. And so they get to the river, but there were people that were already aware. And so they made sure that they captured him at the river. And they did so because they captured his family. So he had to come back, and then they got him. So when they got him, oh my God, it was a sad story, because from then, they then took him, first of all, they kept him in the jail cell for a few days. Then they loaded him on a plane to take him to, in other words, since Mobutu could not kill him directly, because I guess he couldn't face him, because remember, it's Lumumba that appointed Mobutu to be the general of the army, the commander of the armies. So what he did, Mobutu, is to literally, both Mobutu and Kasa-Vubu were to hand over Lumumba to his sworn enemies, Tshombe and the Katangese. And so that's how, handing him over in that plane, Lumumba and his two colleagues flew in that plane, being beaten up throughout in that flight. They got so much beatings. When they got into Kisangani, into Lubumbashi, you see the video. It's there. There's a video of how he got arrested and how he comes out. That video really, really breaks my heart. And then from there, he was then taken to this cabinet meeting. A special cabinet meeting was put together very quickly with Shombe and all the key executives in Lubumbashi there. And they hated this man. He was beaten up, he was spat on, he was kicked. He really got a lot of beating there. But Lumumba being Lumumba, if you want to understand how radical that man was, read his last letter to his wife. Just read that letter. It's all over the internet. You can find it. Just type Lumumba's last letter to his wife and read the palpable, how can I put it? His passion for Africa. Truly, Lumumba was a martyr of the Congo. So on the 17th of January, like I'm saying, after all this torture, he was handed over to the Katangese authorities, including Governor Shombe, and reporters saw it, and then he was subsequently executed by Belgian-led Katangese troops and mercenaries. So these were Katangese, these were Africans that literally executed Lumumba. He was done by firing squad, and then later when word got out, because nobody knew what had happened to him, nobody had known what had happened to him yet, but word got out that there's an issue. They believe he was killed, and for some reason they didn't want to be seen to be the ones that killed Lumumba. I don't know why that was the case, but they just didn't want to be seen as the ones who killed Lumumba. So they claim they don't know what happened to him. So, but the truth is, the mercenaries were asked to exhume his body and make him disappear. So you can imagine, and one of the officials of this particular story is seen on a documentary. There's a documentary that actually shows the last surviving mercenary and what he did. So I'll get to that. So they had to exhume his body. Just imagine, after being in the ground for 3-4 days in this African heat, chop it into pieces and then drop everything into containers of sulfuric acid, drums of sulfuric acid, to make sure his whole body dissolved. It was a very, very grotesque work, but they did it. And that particular mercenary tells the story and then shows Lumumba's tooth. It says, "This is the souvenir I kept. This is the tooth of Lumumba." In 2022, I believe, the Belgians, as usual, after a lot of, cries and all the things that have happened, that's when they finally, the daughter to this mercenary, after he died, because he died, this recording was done in 2002, I think, 2001, and then in 2015, the daughter to this guy, in putting away his things, found this box, and it was marked Lumumba's tooth. So she felt very bad about it, reported it to the authorities, and then reported it to the world, and then asked that it be given back. And so the Belgians then obviously called officials from the Congo, and then they had a full ceremony, a whole church service, the whole works, and then put that tooth in there and had that returned to the Congo. In the Congo, there was a full funeral procession, and he was then buried at the monument that ironically was built in 1965 by Mobutu. When Mobutu took over the country the second time after the Katangese crisis, which led to the death of, what's his name? The death of, what's his name? Dag Hammarskjöld. You remember Dag Hammarskjöld was the UN Secretary General who was killed in Ndola when his plane was shot down. This was all during the same crisis in 1961. Very tumultuous times. And it was in that period that this happened. So in 2022 or 2021, I can't remember very well, the tooth and the full ceremony with the daughter of Lumumba, who was a little 5-year-old child then, when the father was killed, were part of that ceremony, and obviously that was restored. In 1965, Mobutu, I remember, in 1965, Mobutu, out of reasons I would never understand, decided to turn Lumumba into a hero. And so he went and, built a monument to Lumumba and did this whole heroification. That's the only word I can use. Heroification, deification of Lumumba. And it is because of that that Lumumba is remembered. Otherwise, Lumumba would have disappeared into the annals of history and would have forgotten who he was. But it's Mobutu, ironically, in a strange twist of fate, who decided, after he was the one that was responsible for literally sending him to his death, to turn this man into a national hero. And so they turned Lumumba into a national hero. But unfortunately, that national heroism did not take away the fact or betray the fact that they are the ones that were directly responsible for his death. So once again, it was his fellow colleagues that sold him out. That this death brought a visceral reaction in many parts of the world and many protests. Can you imagine? Many protests were held, including within the US and the UK. So people got to learn about the injustice of what happened to Lumumba. Okay, it wasn't without a sense of irony, like I said, that later on, after Mobutu Sese Seko's second coup in 1966, he chose to have Lumumba honored, whether out of guilt or political expedience, I am not certain. However, it is this very same honor and recognition that would later play a role in his remembrance and the revival of his legacy, especially after the deposition of Mobutu, okay, and the commencement of the rule of President Laurent Desire Kabila, the father to Joseph Kabila. Okay, I am short of words and space to list how many other presidents and leaders here in Africa, okay, were sold out by their fellow Africans. And this has been a pattern for which we must own up and take responsibility. Let me end by using an example from the USA, where in 1969, the leader of the Illinois Black Panther Party chairman, Fred Hampton Jr., was murdered following his fateful betrayal by FBI informant William O'Neill. This has been thoroughly covered in the 1989 PBS documentary series Eyes on the Prize 2, and also award-winning 2020 film Judas and the Black Messiah, with the iconic role played by Daniel Kaluuya. So you may remember that. All right. So that's another story that shows you the levels of betrayal. When you begin to look deep into many of the stories of our people, you see Judas Iscariots everywhere. You see that even the famous transatlantic slave trade, trans-Arabic slave trade, could not have taken place if our own people had not been part of that betrayal. Today, one of the greatest reasons Africa remains crippled in poverty is because our own people are part of it. Here in this country, you are learning of the grand theft and corruption that have been going on in the past, like all regimes, maybe with the exception of Union. With the MMD, whether the Patriotic Front, I am afraid to say, I believe even the current, we are going to hear the stories. So our African people are huge when it comes to corruption. And to point our hands and say it's the colonialists is doing ourselves a disservice if we don't also own up as a people for the role that we continue to play even now. Who is our greatest enemy? Who is aiding the perpetuation of this poverty? Our very own fellow brothers and sisters. On that note, remember to share this video. Have a great day. See you tomorrow when we have Madam Ruth coming through to stand in for Dr. Sunshine Sylvia, who is in Malaysia. Thank you so much for being part of this series. Join me next week when I look at the second. So I'm going into the second of the 7 major factors transforming Africa, which is raising our standards. I'm going to talk deeply about standards. Have a great day and God bless you guys.